On the day of his picture-perfect wedding, a billionaire CEO's heart stops, not from love, but from the sight of his ex-wife holding the hand of a child who looks just like him. Secrets, heartbreak, and a revelation that changes everything. Welcome to the True Crime Studio, where the most unexpected stories come to life. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more tales that will leave you speechless.
Glow of sunlight filtered through the towering stained glass windows of St. Matthew's Cathedral, casting multicolored reflections on the marble floors. Ethan Caldwell adjusted the cuffs of his custom-tailored tuxedo, the polished gold of his cufflinks gleaming under the soft light. Everything about this day, from the meticulously chosen floral arrangements to the orchestral string quartet playing softly in the background, screamed perfection. It was the culmination of years of meticulous planning, not just for the wedding itself but for the life he had worked so hard to build. Ethan turned to the mirror in the private room where he waited, taking a moment to smooth down his hair. At 40, he looked every bit the powerful CEO he had become, confident, composed, and accomplished. His company, Caldwell Enterprises, had transformed from a modest tech startup to a multi-billion-dollar empire under his leadership. Marrying Claire Whitmore, the poised and stunning daughter of a prominent senator, was the next logical step. Their union was more than just romantic. It was a partnership that would further cement his legacy. And yet, as he adjusted his bow tie, a flicker of doubt crept into his mind. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it lingered just long enough for him to notice. Ethan brushed it aside. Doubts were normal, weren't they? This day was perfect. He was about to marry a woman who was perfect. His life was, by all outward measures, perfect. Still, there was a nagging weight in his chest that he couldn't explain. The knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. His best man, Marcus, stepped in, his usual easy grin plastered across his face. "You ready, boss?" Marcus asked, straightening his own tie as he leaned casually against the doorframe. "The guests are all seated. It's a full house out there." Ethan nodded, managing a smile. "Of course. Let's do this." As they made their way to the grand entrance of the church, Ethan glanced at the bustling crowd of family, friends, and high-profile guests. The buzz of conversation was underlined by the faint strains of the quartet's music. Everything looked exactly as it should. He reminded himself again that this was the life he had chosen, the life he had worked so tirelessly to build. Then, just as he stepped toward the entrance, something caught his eye. At first, it was just a figure in the crowd, a woman standing off to the side, near the edge of the gathering. She wasn't dressed like the other guests, her attire simpler and more understated. She was holding the hand of a young boy, who looked no older than 2 or 3. There was something achingly familiar about her, though Ethan couldn't quite place it. His gaze lingered, trying to make sense of the unexpected tug in his chest. And then it hit him. Lily. The name alone was enough to send a wave of emotions crashing over him, shock, disbelief, and a pang of something he couldn't quite name. It had been 3 years since he'd last seen her, and even longer since they'd exchanged anything other than curt, formal emails during the divorce proceedings. She looked different, but not unrecognizably so. Her hair, once long and flowing, was now cut to her shoulders, and there was a quiet strength in her posture that hadn't been there before. But it was her eyes that he recognized immediately, those warm hazel eyes that had once felt like home. His attention shifted to the boy beside her. The child clung to her hand, his face partially hidden as he looked down shyly. But what Ethan did see made his breath catch. The boy's hair was the same rich brown as his own, and his features, there was something unsettlingly familiar about them. "Ethan? You okay?" Marcus's voice snapped him back to reality. Marcus was staring at him, concern flickering across his face. Ethan shook his head, forcing himself to focus. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thought I saw someone I recognized." Marcus followed Ethan's gaze but saw nothing unusual. "All right, well, let's get you in there. Claire's probably getting nervous." Nodding absently, Ethan allowed Marcus to guide him toward the entrance, but his mind was elsewhere. As the grand doors opened and the soft strains of the wedding march began to play, Ethan found himself unable to fully concentrate. His thoughts were tangled, racing with questions he couldn't yet articulate. What was Lily doing here? Why had she brought the boy? And why did the child look so much like him? The ceremony began, the priest's voice echoing in the cavernous space of the church. Claire walked down the aisle, radiant in her custom gown, her smile lighting up the room. The crowd sighed in collective admiration, and Ethan did his best to match her expression as she joined him at the altar. But even as he went through the motions, repeating the vows and exchanging rings, his mind was elsewhere. When the ceremony concluded and applause erupted, Ethan barely registered it. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for Lily and the boy, but they were gone. The spot where they had stood was now empty, as though they had never been there at all. As the newlyweds exited the church to a flurry of flower petals and cheers, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the day had shifted in some fundamental way. Something had been set in motion, something he wasn't prepared for. While Claire smiled and waved to the cameras, Ethan's gaze lingered on the edge of the crowd, hoping to catch one last glimpse of Lily and the boy. They were nowhere to be seen. The limousine doors closed, sealing him inside with Claire as the car pulled away. She leaned her head on his shoulder, talking excitedly about their upcoming reception and the life they would build together. Ethan nodded along, but his responses were automatic, his thoughts still with the woman and child who had appeared so suddenly and left just as quickly. He told himself it didn't mean anything, that it was a coincidence, an anomaly. But deep down, he knew better. The past had a way of creeping back into the present, and today, it had done so in a way he couldn't ignore. Ethan Caldwell's perfect day suddenly felt far from perfect. The reception was everything one would expect from a wedding of such high profile, elegant, extravagant, and meticulously planned. The grand ballroom was adorned with cascading floral arrangements, crystal chandeliers, and enough champagne to drown an empire. Guests mingled in designer gowns and tuxedos, their conversations a symphony of compliments and polite laughter. Yet, amidst the opulence and celebration, Ethan felt disconnected, his mind elsewhere. He moved through the crowd like a shadow of himself, offering smiles and handshakes on autopilot. Claire, ever the consummate hostess, had taken center stage, charming their guests with her effortless grace. Ethan envied her ability to be so present, so utterly unaffected. Every time he tried to focus on the moment, his thoughts were pulled back to Lily and the boy. The image of them standing by the church gates, their silhouettes framed by the afternoon sun, was burned into his mind. Eventually, he excused himself under the guise of needing air. The night sky stretched above him as he stepped out onto the balcony, the cool breeze a welcome reprieve from the stifling warmth of the crowded room. He leaned against the railing, staring out at the city skyline. Why was she there? Why now, after all this time? And the boy, Jamie, wasn't it? The name echoed in his mind. He hadn't imagined the resemblance. Ethan wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but the connection was too strong to ignore. The child's features, the shape of his eyes, the line of his jaw, they were unmistakable. He looked like Ethan had when he was a child. His thoughts spiraled, and he didn't notice the footsteps behind him until a familiar voice broke the silence. "You've always been good at disappearing from your own parties." He turned sharply, his heart lurching. Lily stood there, her arms crossed over her chest. She was dressed simply, the understated elegance of her outfit a stark contrast to the lavish display inside. Her hair caught the light from the ballroom, and for a moment, she looked exactly as she had on their wedding day all those years ago. The memory was like a punch to the gut. "Lily," he said, his voice rough. "What are you doing here?" Her expression was guarded, but there was a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "I wasn't planning to stay. I needed to see you." Ethan straightened, his pulse quickening. "And the boy? Jamie. Is he?" He stopped himself, the words catching in his throat. He didn't want to ask, didn't want to hear the answer that would change everything. Lily hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. She glanced down briefly before meeting his gaze. "He's your son, Ethan." The world seemed to tilt. Ethan gripped the railing, the metal cold and solid beneath his fingers, grounding him as the revelation sunk in. His son. The phrase felt foreign, unreal, like it belonged to someone else's life. He struggled to find the right words, the right question, but his mind was a chaotic storm. "You didn't tell me?" he finally managed, his voice low but sharp. "You kept him from me?" Lily flinched at the accusation, but her shoulders squared defensively. "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice firm. "When we divorced, things were messy. You made it clear you wanted a clean break, that you didn't want anything tying you down. And when I found out I was pregnant, She stopped, taking a shaky breath. "I didn't know how to tell you. And by the time I did, I didn't think you'd care." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You didn't think I'd care? You had no right to make that decision for me." "Maybe not," she admitted, her voice softer now. "But you have to understand, Ethan. You were so focused on your career, on building your empire. I didn't think you had room for us in your life. And I didn't want to force you into something you didn't want." He stared at her, a mix of anger and disbelief churning in his chest. "So you just decided I didn't deserve to know? That Jamie didn't deserve to know his father? I thought I was doing what was best for him," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought I was protecting him." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, pacing a few steps before turning back to her. "And now? What changed? Why are you here now?" Lily's eyes glistened, and she looked down for a moment, composing herself. "Jamie's been asking questions," she said quietly. "About his dad. He's getting older, and I couldn't keep lying to him. He deserves to know the truth." The weight of her words settled over him, heavy and suffocating. Ethan had always prided himself on control, on his ability to handle any situation, but this was different. This was personal in a way he hadn't been prepared for. "And you thought dropping this on me on my wedding day was the best way to handle it?" he asked, bitterness creeping into his tone. Lily winced. "I didn't plan for it to happen this way. I saw the announcement in the papers, and I panicked. I thought if I didn't tell you now, I might never get the chance." He shook his head, his mind racing. The timing was cruel, but he couldn't ignore the truth standing in front of him. Jamie was his son. That fact was undeniable now, and it changed everything. He thought of the boy's shy face, the way he had clung to Lily's hand. He had missed so much already, first words, first steps, birthdays he hadn't even known to celebrate. "What do you want from me, Lily?" he asked finally, his voice quieter, more resigned. "Why now?" "I don't want anything from you," she said, her tone earnest. "I just thought you deserved to know. What you do with that is up to you." Ethan studied her, his emotions a tangled mess of anger, guilt, and something else he couldn't quite name. He had always believed his life was exactly as it should be, carefully curated, perfectly planned. But now, that certainty felt like an illusion. "Does he know?" he asked. "Jamie. Does he know about me?" Lily shook her head. "Not yet. I thought we should figure that out together." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Ethan looked out at the city lights, the distant hum of traffic a faint backdrop to the silence that had settled over them. For the first time in years, he felt unmoored, unsure of what came next. But one thing was clear. His life was no longer just his own. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and silver as Ethan stared into the distance, his thoughts a tangled web. Lily stood a few feet away, watching him, her expression caught between defiance and regret. The truth she had dropped on him, Jamie, his son, still echoed in his mind, louder than the murmured chatter of the reception filtering through the open balcony doors. He turned back to her, his jaw tight, his voice low but edged with anger. 3 years, Lily. You kept this from me for 3 years. Do you know what you've taken from me? Do you have any idea?" Lily crossed her arms, her fingers gripping her elbows as if trying to hold herself together. "I know exactly what I've taken from you, Ethan," she said quietly. "I've thought about it every single day. Do you think this was easy for me? Do you think I wanted this? Then why? His voice rose slightly, frustration breaking through his usual composed demeanor. Why didn't you tell me? You didn't even give me a chance. You just decided I wasn't worth knowing the truth. That Jamie wasn't worth having his father. Lily's eyes flashed with anger, her voice trembling as she replied. Because you made it clear what mattered to you, Ethan. Your work. Your company. Your image. When we divorced, you couldn't wait to move on and leave everything behind, including me. I wasn't going to force you into something you didn't want, into being a father when you were so focused on everything else. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. That wasn't your decision to make. You don't get to decide how I would have reacted. You don't get to rewrite the narrative and leave me out of it. Lily's shoulders sagged slightly, and for a moment she looked exhausted, as though she'd been carrying this weight alone for far too long. Do you remember what you said the last time we spoke before the papers were finalized? She asked, her voice softer now. You told me you needed a clean break. That you didn't want any ties that would hold you back. I thought I was doing what you wanted. Ethan exhaled sharply, the memory hitting him like a punch to the gut. He had said those words. In the heat of their arguments, in the pain of their crumbling marriage, he had said them. At the time, they had felt like armor, a way to protect himself from the chaos of their relationship. But now, they felt like shackles. I didn't mean it like that, he said, his voice quieter, almost pleading. I was angry, Lily. Hurt. I didn't mean I didn't want. He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. I didn't mean Jamie. I know that now, she admitted, her tone heavy with regret. But back then, I didn't know what to do. And then I was pregnant, and you were already building your empire, and I didn't want to derail your life. So I kept quiet. And then, it got harder to say anything as time went on. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for a moment they stood in silence, the gap between them filled with years of unspoken truths. Ethan's anger hadn't dissipated, but beneath it was a growing tide of something else, grief for the time he had lost, for the milestones he had missed. Do you have any idea what it feels like to find out I have a son this way? He asked finally, his voice thick. On the day I'm supposed to be starting a new chapter of my life? Lily looked away, guilt flickering across her face. I didn't plan it this way, Ethan. I swear. When I saw the announcement about the wedding, I panicked. I didn't want to wait any longer, but I also didn't know how to tell you. So I showed up. Maybe it was selfish, but I couldn't keep it from you anymore. Ethan was about to respond when a small voice interrupted them, soft but insistent. Mommy? Both of them froze, turning toward the source of the sound. Jamie stood in the doorway to the balcony, clutching a small stuffed animal in one hand and rubbing his eyes with the other. He looked sleepy and a little confused, but his gaze shifted from Lily to Ethan with quiet curiosity. Lily crouched down, her voice instantly gentle. Hey, sweetheart. What are you doing out here? I thought you were with Mrs. Grayson. Jamie shrugged, his small shoulders rising and falling. I wanted to find you, he said simply. His eyes lingered on Ethan, studying him with a kind of innocent wonder. Who's that? Ethan felt his throat tighten, his ability to speak suddenly robbed by the weight of the moment. He looked at the boy, his son, and felt a rush of emotion so intense it was almost unbearable. The resemblance was even more striking up close. Jamie's eyes, his nose, even the tilt of his head, it was like looking at a younger version of himself. Lily hesitated, glancing at Ethan before turning back to Jamie. This is Ethan, she said carefully. He's a friend of Mommy's. Jamie tilted his head, his expression curious but unguarded. You look like me, he said matter-of-factly, the observation cutting through the tension like a blade. Ethan swallowed hard, crouching down so he was at a level with Jamie. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to navigate this sudden, impossible moment. But he couldn't look away from the boy, couldn't deny the connection he felt deep in his bones. Yeah, Ethan said finally, his voice softer than he'd intended. I guess I do. Jamie's gaze didn't waver. Are you my dad? The question hung in the air, sharp and clear and utterly devastating. Ethan's breath caught, his mind reeling. He had no idea how to answer, no idea how to explain the complexity of the situation to a child so young. But he also knew he couldn't lie, not now, not to Jamie. Before he could speak, Lily stepped in, placing a hand gently on Jamie's shoulder. "We'll talk about that soon, sweetheart," she said softly. "But right now, we need to get you back inside, okay?" Jamie looked disappointed but nodded, trusting his mother's words without question. Ethan watched as Lily guided him back toward the door, his small hand tucked securely in hers. Just before they stepped inside, Jamie turned back to Ethan, offering a shy, tentative smile. Ethan managed to smile back, though his chest felt like it might cave in under the weight of everything that had just happened. As the door closed behind them, he remained where he was, staring at the empty space where they had been. The boy's words echoed in his mind. "Are you my dad?" The question had shaken something loose inside him, something he hadn't been prepared to confront. For years, Ethan had told himself he had moved on from his past, that he had built a life free of complications and regrets. But tonight, his carefully constructed world had begun to crumble, and he wasn't sure he could ever put it back together again. Ethan stood on the balcony long after Lily and Jamie had left, the cool night air doing little to calm the storm brewing inside him. The words Jamie had spoken echoed in his mind, piercing through his thoughts like a relentless drumbeat. "Are you my dad?" The simplicity of the question had shattered the carefully constructed walls around his life, exposing cracks he didn't know were there, or perhaps had refused to acknowledge. Finally, with a deep breath, he pushed himself away from the railing and headed back inside. The warmth and noise of the reception greeted him, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside his head. Laughter, clinking glasses, and music filled the air, and yet it all felt distant, like a dream he couldn't quite wake up from. Claire was standing near the center of the room, surrounded by guests who were undoubtedly hanging on her every word. Her laughter rang out, light and melodic, the picture of a radiant bride. She glanced in his direction, her eyes lighting up as she waved him over. Ethan hesitated for a moment before making his way to her, forcing a smile onto his face. "There you are," she said, slipping her arm through his as he reached her side. "I was starting to think you'd run off." Her joke landed awkwardly in his chest, too close to the thoughts swirling in his mind. He managed a chuckle, but it sounded hollow even to his own ears. Claire's brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of concern passing over her features. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, tilting her head to meet his gaze. "You've been acting off all evening." "I'm fine," he lied quickly, brushing it off. "Just a lot on my mind. It's been a long day." Before she could press further, one of the guests interrupted with congratulations, and Claire was pulled back into the flow of conversation. Ethan used the moment to slip away again, retreating to a quieter corner of the room. His mind was racing, and no matter how hard he tried to focus, his thoughts kept circling back to Jamie, to Lily, to everything he had just learned. His stomach tightened as he realized how unprepared he was to face this new reality. He had spent years building a life that was neatly compartmentalized, free of mess or complication. And now, with just a few words, that illusion had come crashing down. It didn't take long for Claire to find him again. She approached him with purpose, her smile replaced by a look of genuine concern. Her hands rested lightly on his arms as she searched his face. "Ethan, talk to me," she said, her voice low and steady. "What's going on? You've been distant all night, and I need to know why." He hesitated, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. There was no easy way to say it, no version of this conversation that wouldn't end badly. But he couldn't keep it from her, not tonight, not after everything that had happened. "Claire." He took a deep breath, his voice wavering slightly. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I just found out." She stepped back slightly, her expression shifting from concern to suspicion. "Okay," she said carefully. "I'm listening." He ran a hand through his hair, the words catching in his throat. "Earlier tonight I ran into someone. My ex-wife, Lily. Claire's eyes narrowed. Lily? What is she doing here? She came to tell me something, he said, his voice strained. Something I didn't know before. Claire, I have a son. His name is Jamie, and he's 3 years old. The color drained from Claire's face, her expression frozen in shock. For a moment she didn't speak, as though trying to process what she had just heard. When she finally did, her voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. You what? She demanded. You have a son? And you're just now telling me this? On our wedding day? I didn't know, Ethan said quickly, his tone pleading. I only just found out tonight. Lily never told me. She showed up here, and you believed her? Claire interrupted, her voice rising. Just like that? You believe this woman, your ex-wife, when she drops a bombshell like this out of nowhere? Ethan flinched at her tone but stood his ground. She wouldn't lie about something like this, Claire. I saw him. I looked at him, and there's no doubt. He's mine. Claire took a step back, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Do you have any idea what this looks like? What this does to us? To me? We're supposed to be starting our life together, and now you're telling me you have a child with another woman? I didn't choose this, Ethan said, his frustration bubbling to the surface. I didn't know, Claire. I'm trying to process this just as much as you are. Process it? She shot back. What's there to process? You either want to be with me, or you don't. Her words hit him harder than he expected, and he felt a knot tighten in his chest. This was the moment he had been dreading, the moment when everything would come to a head. He thought about Jamie, about the look in his eyes, the innocence of his question. Are you my dad? He couldn't walk away from that. Not now. Not ever. Claire, he said, his voice soft but resolute. I can't ignore this. Jamie is my son, and he deserves to have me in his life. I won't turn my back on him. She stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, he thought she might soften, that she might understand. But then her lips pressed into a thin line, and she shook her head. I can't do this, she said, her voice trembling. I can't be second to your past, to your mistakes. I thought we were building a future together, Ethan, but clearly I was wrong. Claire, wait, he began, but she cut him off with a sharp gesture. No, she said firmly. I won't be part of this. I won't play second fiddle to a life you never told me about. Consider this over. With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the corner of the reception hall. The noise and laughter of the crowd seemed to fade into the background as Ethan watched her go, the weight of her words settling heavily on his shoulders. He should have felt devastated, but instead, there was a strange sense of clarity, of inevitability. His life had changed irrevocably tonight, and there was no going back. For better or worse, he had a son who needed him. And no matter how much it hurt to lose Claire, Ethan knew where his priorities had to lie. He left the reception shortly after, stepping out into the cool night air once again. This time, he didn't feel lost. His future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. Jamie's face lingered in his mind as he walked away from the life he had so carefully built, ready to face the unknown. The morning sunlight filtered through the large windows of Ethan's penthouse, casting a golden hue over the modern, minimalist decor. He stood by the kitchen counter, sipping his coffee and staring out at the sprawling city below. It was quieter than usual. The silence felt heavier somehow, though he wasn't sure if it was because of Claire's absence or the weight of what lay ahead. After the fallout at the wedding, Ethan had reached out to Lily. He needed time to understand Jamie, to figure out how to step into a role he had never expected to fill. To his surprise, Lily had agreed cautiously to let him spend the day with Jamie. Her only condition had been that she would stay close by, nearby but out of sight, in case Jamie needed her. Ethan had agreed, grateful for the chance but nervous about what was to come. The doorbell rang, and Ethan's heart thudded in his chest. He put down his coffee, straightened his shirt, and crossed the room. When he opened the door, Lily stood there, holding Jamie's hand. The boy clutched a small, well-loved stuffed dinosaur in his free hand, his eyes wide as he looked up at Ethan. "Hi," Ethan said, his voice softer than usual. He crouched down, bringing himself to Jamie's level. "Hey, Jamie. I'm Ethan." Jamie didn't say anything at first, just studied him with the quiet curiosity only a child could muster. His resemblance to Ethan was striking up close, and it made Ethan's heart ache with both pride and guilt. After a moment, Jamie offered a small, tentative smile. "Hi," he said shyly, his grip tightening on his dinosaur. Ethan looked up at Lily, who gave him a small nod before stepping back. "I'll be at the coffee shop downstairs," she said. "Call me if you need anything." He watched her leave, then turned his attention back to Jamie. "So," he said, trying to sound cheerful, "do you like dinosaurs?" Jamie's face lit up, and he held up his stuffed toy. "This is Rexy," he said. "He's my favorite." Ethan smiled, relief washing over him. "Rexy, huh? I like dinosaurs too. Do you want to come in? I've got some cool stuff we can look at." Jamie nodded, and Ethan stepped aside to let him in. As the boy walked into the apartment, he seemed a little overwhelmed at first, his eyes darting around the expanse of space. Ethan led him to the living room, where he had set out a few books and toys he'd picked up the night before, mostly dinosaurs, hoping it would help break the ice. Jamie's eyes lit up when he saw the toys, and he immediately sat down on the rug, picking up a brightly colored model of A.T. Rex. Ethan sat down across from him, watching as the boy started to play, his initial shyness fading. "Do you know what kind of dinosaur that is?" Ethan asked, pointing to the toy in Jamie's hand. Jamie nodded enthusiastically. "It's A.T. Rex. They're really big and really strong, and they eat meat." "That's right," Ethan said, smiling. "Do you know what T. Rex means?" Jamie frowned in thought, then shook his head. "It means Tyrant Lizard King," Ethan explained. "Pretty cool, huh?" Jamie's eyes widened. "Whoa. I didn't know that." They spent the next hour going through the books and toys, with Jamie eagerly asking questions and sharing the dinosaur facts he knew. Ethan found himself completely engrossed, amazed by the boy's enthusiasm and curiosity. It was strange, wonderful, but strange, how natural it felt to sit here with Jamie, sharing this moment. At one point, Jamie looked up at him, his expression serious. "Do you like dinosaurs because I like dinosaurs?" he asked. Ethan chuckled. "I liked dinosaurs when I was your age, too. I used to have A.T. Rex just like Rexy." Jamie seemed satisfied with that answer and went back to playing, but Ethan's chest tightened. He wished he had been there to see Jamie's fascination with dinosaurs develop, to share those moments with him from the beginning. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he promised himself he wouldn't miss any more of Jamie's life. Later, Ethan suggested they go out for lunch. Jamie's face lit up when Ethan asked him what he wanted to eat, and he quickly declared his love for pizza. They walked to a nearby family-friendly restaurant, and Ethan found himself smiling as Jamie chatted away about his favorite toppings, pepperoni, olives, and extra cheese. At the restaurant, they sat in a booth by the window. Jamie pressed his nose against the glass, watching the people outside as they waited for their food. When the pizza arrived, Jamie's excitement was contagious, and Ethan couldn't help but laugh as the boy dove in, his cheeks puffed out like a chipmunk as he tried to take a big bite. "You've got a little something right here," Ethan said, pointing to the corner of his own mouth. Jamie giggled and wiped his face with a napkin. "Oops." Ethan leaned back, watching Jamie with a mix of awe and wonder. The bond they had formed in just a few hours felt like the most important thing in the world, and he couldn't imagine ever letting it go. For the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't realized he was missing, a deep, unshakable sense of connection. As they walked back to the apartment, Jamie held Ethan's hand, his small fingers wrapped tightly around his. Ethan's heart swelled at the simple gesture, and he found himself marveling at how much one little boy could change everything. When they returned, Jamie was starting to look tired. Ethan helped him settle on the couch with a blanket and turned on a nature documentary about dinosaurs. Jamie's eyes grew heavy as he watched, and before long, he had fallen asleep, his head resting on the cushion. Ethan sat nearby, his gaze fixed on the boy's peaceful face. He thought about all the moments he had missed, the first words, the first steps, the birthdays. But he also thought about the moments still to come, the memories they would create together. It wasn't too late to be the father Jamie deserved. When Lily returned, she found Ethan sitting beside Jamie, who was still fast asleep. She paused in the doorway, taking in the sight, her expression softening. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked up at her, his heart full. "Better than I could have ever hoped." She smiled, a small, tentative smile, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt like they were on the same side again. As he glanced back at Jamie, he knew one thing with certainty: his life had changed, and for once, he was ready to embrace it. Ethan sat at the kitchen table later that evening, nursing a cup of tea Lily had made while Jamie slept soundly on the couch. The apartment was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rustle of Jamie shifting in his sleep. The events of the day had left Ethan emotionally drained but oddly at peace. For the first time in years, he felt like he was beginning to understand what his life could become. Lily sat across from him, her fingers wrapped around her own mug. She looked tired but calm, her face framed by loose strands of hair that had escaped her ponytail. There was a stillness about her now, different from the Lily he remembered. In the past, she had always been brimming with energy, full of plans and dreams. The years had changed her, softened her in some ways, but there was also a quiet resilience that hadn't been there before. "Thank you for letting me spend the day with him," Ethan said softly, breaking the silence. "It means more to me than I can put into words." Lily nodded, her lips curving into a small, tired smile. "I wasn't sure how it would go," she admitted. "But Jamie, he took to you so easily. I can see how much he likes you already." Ethan's chest tightened at her words. "I just want to be there for him now. To make up for the time I've missed." Lily looked down at her mug, tracing the rim with her finger. "I hope you know I never kept him from you out of spite. It wasn't about punishing you or anything like that." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "I know. At least, I'm starting to understand. But I need to hear it, Lily. I need to know what happened. Why you didn't tell me." She sighed, setting her mug down. "When we separated, everything was so raw. I felt like I was drowning, and you were so focused on the company. I didn't blame you for it, not really, but it felt like I was the only one left carrying the weight of everything we had built together." Ethan frowned, guilt gnawing at him. "I was selfish," he admitted. "I thought throwing myself into work would fix everything, or at least distract me from how broken we were." "You weren't the only one who was broken," Lily said quietly. "I was angry too. Hurt. And when I found out I was pregnant, I didn't know how to feel. Part of me was terrified, and part of me thought, maybe this was a way to hold on to something good. But I knew telling you would complicate everything." "You thought I wouldn't care," Ethan said, his voice thick with regret. Lily shook her head. "It wasn't that simple. I knew you cared about me in your own way. But you were so clear about wanting to move on, about wanting a clean slate. I didn't want to force you into something you didn't want, especially when I wasn't sure how I felt about it myself. And as the months went by, it just got harder and harder to reach out. I told myself I was protecting Jamie, but maybe I was protecting myself, too." Her words hit Ethan like a wave. He had always seen their separation as inevitable, the natural consequence of two people who had grown apart. But now, hearing her side of the story, he realized how much pain and sacrifice had been hidden beneath the surface. "What about after he was born?" he asked gently. "Did you ever think about telling me then?" Lily nodded, her eyes glistening. "I thought about it every day. But by then you were everywhere, on magazine covers, in interviews, at galas. You seemed untouchable. Like you'd built this perfect life without me, and I didn't want to ruin that for you. I told myself Jamie and I were better off on our own. Ethan reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. You should have told me. I would have wanted to know, Lily. I would have wanted to be there. Tears welled in her eyes, and she blinked them away, her voice trembling. I didn't want Jamie to feel like he was a burden to you. He deserves to be loved completely, without question. And I wasn't sure if you were in a place to give him that. Ethan's throat tightened as her words sank in. She had made decisions he didn't agree with, but he couldn't deny the love and protection that had driven them. She had done what she thought was best for Jamie, even if it meant carrying the burden alone. I can't change the past, he said softly. But I want to be there now. For him, and for you. Lily looked at him, her expression unreadable. I don't need you to be there for me, Ethan. I've learned how to stand on my own. But Jamie needs you. If you're ready to step into that role, then I'll support it. But I need to know you're serious. Ethan met her gaze, his resolve clear. I'm serious, Lily. I want to be his father. I don't know how to do this yet, but I'll figure it out. I won't let him down. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. But this time, it didn't feel as heavy. It felt like the beginning of something new, something that could grow from the ashes of what they had lost. Lily leaned back in her chair, her expression softening. You've changed, you know, she said quietly. The Ethan I knew back then. I don't think he would have said any of that. Maybe I've finally learned what's important, he replied. Or maybe Jamie's just shown me what really matters. She smiled, and for the first time in years it reached her eyes. He has a way of doing that. They sat together for a while longer, the conversation drifting to lighter topics. Lily shared stories about Jamie's first steps, his favorite bedtime stories, and his knack for making up silly songs. Ethan listened intently, hanging on every word, his heart swelling with each new detail. By the time Lily stood to leave, the tension between them had eased, replaced by a tentative sense of understanding. As she gathered her things and moved to wake Jamie, Ethan stopped her. Lily, he said, his voice earnest. Thank you. For everything you've done for him. I don't think I ever really appreciated just how strong you are. She paused, looking at him for a long moment. I did what I had to do, she said simply. For Jamie. That's what matters. He nodded, his respect for her growing in a way he hadn't thought possible. As she carried Jamie to the door, his head resting on her shoulder, Ethan felt a quiet sense of hope. Their story wasn't over yet, and for the first time in a long time, he was ready to write the next chapter. Ethan found himself staring out the window of his office, the city skyline stretching endlessly before him. The view was usually a source of comfort, a reminder of everything he had built, but today it felt hollow. The conversation with Lily from the night before still lingered in his mind, the weight of her words and the image of Jamie sleeping peacefully on the couch stirring emotions he couldn't shake. He had always prided himself on his ability to solve problems, to take charge and fix things. But this wasn't a business deal or a project deadline. This was his son, his family, and the stakes were higher than anything he had faced before. Ethan turned away from the window and grabbed his phone. He scrolled to Lily's number, hesitating only a moment before dialing. The line rang twice before she picked up, her voice cautious but polite. Hi, Ethan. Hi, he replied, trying to keep his tone steady. I was wondering if we could talk. I'd like to. I'd like to figure out what comes next. There was a pause on the other end, and he could hear the faint sounds of Jamie's laughter in the background. All right, Lily said finally. I'm at the park with Jamie. If you're free, you can meet us here. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Ethan said, already grabbing his jacket. The park was bustling with families when he arrived, the sound of children playing blending with the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Ethan spotted Lily sitting on a bench near the playground, watching Jamie as he climbed a set of monkey bars with determination. She looked up as he approached, offering a small nod in greeting. He sat down beside her, his gaze drawn to Jamie, who had reached the top and was waving proudly in their direction. "He's fearless," Ethan said with a hint of admiration. Lily smiled, her expression softening. "He gets that from you." The comment caught him off guard, but he didn't dwell on it. Instead, he took a deep breath and turned to her. "Lily, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About Jamie, about everything. And I want you to know I'm all in. Whatever it takes, I want to be there for him. For both of you." Lily's expression grew wary, her guard rising instinctively. "Ethan, this isn't something you can fix with money or grand gestures. Being a father isn't just about showing up once in a while. It's about consistency, about being there every day." "I know," he said quickly. "And I'm not just talking about financial support, though I'll make sure you and Jamie never have to worry about anything again. I mean being present. Being someone he can count on." Lily studied him, her hazel eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. "You say that now, but what happens when work gets busy? When the next big deal comes along?" Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago, Lily. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm not going to let Jamie be one of them. I'll prove it to you, not with words, but with actions." Lily looked away, her gaze drifting to Jamie, who was now chasing a butterfly across the grass. "He's already attached to you," she said quietly. "After just one day. If you're serious about this, you can't back out. He needs stability, Ethan. He's been through enough already." "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan said firmly. "I promise." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the park filling the space between them. Ethan felt the weight of her hesitation, her caution, but he also saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes, a hope she was trying hard to suppress. "I want to make things easier for you," he said after a while. "Let me help with Jamie's school, his activities, whatever he needs. And if you need help with anything at all, I want you to tell me." Lily let out a small sigh, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. "It's not easy for me to accept help, Ethan. I've been doing this on my own for so long, it's hard to let someone else in." "I get that," he said gently. "But you don't have to do it alone anymore. I want to be a partner in this, not just a bystander." Her lips pressed together, and for a moment, Ethan thought she might argue. But instead, she nodded, her voice soft as she said, "Okay. We'll try this. But I need to see that you're serious, Ethan. No excuses, no disappearing acts." "You have my word," he said, his tone resolute. Jamie ran over to them then, his face flushed with excitement. "Did you see me on the monkey bars, Mommy? I was so high." "I saw, buddy," Lily said, smiling as she ruffled his hair. "You were amazing." Jamie turned to Ethan, his eyes shining. "Did you see too?" "I did," Ethan said, crouching down to Jamie's level. "You were like a little T-Rex up there, unstoppable." Jamie giggled, his joy infectious, and Ethan felt his heart swell. This was what he had been missing, and he couldn't believe how close he had come to never knowing it. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan found himself relaxing into the rhythm of their time together. He pushed Jamie on the swings, helped him build a small castle out of sand, and listened intently as the boy explained his theories about which dinosaurs would win in a fight. Lily watched from a distance, her expression thoughtful. She couldn't deny that Ethan was making an effort, and Jamie's happiness was undeniable. But a part of her remained cautious, wary of letting her guard down too soon. Later, as they walked back to Lily's car, Jamie clung to Ethan's hand, his small fingers wrapped tightly around his. "Can we do this again, Daddy?" he asked, the words slipping out so naturally it stopped Ethan in his tracks. Lily froze, her breath catching. She looked at Ethan, unsure of how he would respond. Ethan crouched down, meeting Jamie's gaze with a mixture of pride and emotion. "Yeah, buddy," he said softly. "We'll do this as much as you want." Jamie beamed, his grip tightening. Lily's eyes softened as she watched the exchange, a flicker of something like trust beginning to form. As they said their goodbyes, Ethan turned to Lily, his voice low but earnest. "Thank you for today. I know this is just the beginning, but I'll prove to you that I mean what I said." Lily nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. "We'll see, Ethan. For Jamie's sake, I hope you're right." As she drove away, Ethan stood in the parking lot, watching the car disappear down the street. He knew he had a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. And he was determined to stay on it, no matter what it took. Ethan sat at his desk, staring at the signed resignation letter in front of him. It was a surreal moment, knowing that he was willingly walking away from the company he had built from the ground up. Caldwell Enterprises had been his life for so long, the foundation of his identity. But now, as he thought about Jamie's laughter and the cautious hope in Lily's eyes, it didn't feel like he was giving something up, it felt like he was gaining something far greater. He picked up the letter and slid it into an envelope, placing it neatly on the desk. The decision hadn't come easily, but after weeks of reflection, he knew it was the right one. He had spent so much of his life chasing success, and now it was time to focus on something real, something lasting. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a series of calculated moves or high-stakes deals. It felt like family. That afternoon, he called an emergency board meeting. The members of Caldwell Enterprises were shocked, their disbelief palpable as Ethan explained his decision to step down as CEO. "This company has been my home for over a decade," he said, his voice steady despite the murmurs in the room. "But it's time for me to take a step back and focus on something more important, my family. I'll be handing over the reins to Marcus, who has been with me since the beginning. I have every confidence in his ability to lead Caldwell Enterprises into the future." There were protests, of course, questions about whether this was a permanent decision or if Ethan might return one day. He answered them calmly, reiterating that his priority was elsewhere now. The meeting ended with a mix of sadness and respect, and as Ethan walked out of the boardroom, he felt a strange lightness, as if a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying was finally gone. That evening, Ethan drove to Lily's house. He had promised Jamie he'd visit, and tonight, he wanted to share the news of his decision with both of them. When Lily opened the door, Jamie came running, throwing his arms around Ethan's legs. "Daddy!" he exclaimed, grinning up at him. Ethan crouched down, pulling Jamie into a hug. The boy's joy was infectious, and Ethan felt his heart swell. "Hey, buddy. How was your day?" "Good. Mommy and I made cookies," Jamie announced proudly. "Do you want one?" "I'd love one," Ethan said with a laugh. As Jamie ran back to the kitchen to grab a cookie, Ethan stood and met Lily's gaze. She looked at him curiously, sensing there was something on his mind. "Can we talk for a minute?" he asked. She nodded, leading him to the living room. They sat across from each other, and Ethan took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I made a decision today," he began. "I stepped down as CEO of Caldwell Enterprises." Lily's eyes widened in surprise. "You did what?" "I realized that I can't give Jamie the attention he deserves while running a company like that," he explained. "I've spent so much of my life focused on work, and I don't want to miss any more of his life. Or yours." Her expression softened, but there was still a hint of wariness. "That's a big decision, Ethan. Are you sure about it?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he said firmly. "I want to be present, Lily. I want to be the kind of father Jamie can count on. And I want to support you, too, in whatever way I can." She nodded slowly, her gaze searching his face. "I hope you know what you're doing, Ethan. This isn't just about showing up, it's about following through." "I know," he said. "And I will. I'm not going to let either of you down." Jamie came bounding back into the room then, holding a plate of cookies. He climbed onto the couch beside Ethan, offering him one with a proud smile. Ethan took it, thanking Jamie with a grin before taking a bite. It was sweet, buttery, and slightly crumbly, the kind of cookie that tasted like home. "This is amazing, Jamie," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. "You and Mommy did a great job." Jamie beamed, leaning against Ethan as he nibbled on his own cookie. Lily watched them, a small smile playing on her lips. For a moment, the room was filled with a comfortable, quiet warmth, a feeling Ethan hadn't realized he'd been missing for so long. As the weeks went by, Ethan's commitment to his new life became clear. He showed up for Jamie's school events, helped him with his dinosaur-themed art projects, and spent countless evenings reading bedtime stories. He also worked to rebuild his relationship with Lily, taking small steps to show her that he was serious about being a part of their lives. There were moments of tension, of course, old wounds that hadn't fully healed and new challenges that came with co-parenting. But there were also moments of joy, Jamie's laughter filling the house, the shared pride in his accomplishments, the quiet evenings where they all sat together, feeling like a family. One Saturday, Ethan surprised them with a trip to the zoo. Jamie was ecstatic, his excitement bubbling over as they walked through the exhibits. Ethan and Lily followed him, their conversations growing easier, more natural. At one point, as they watched Jamie press his face against the glass of the dinosaur exhibit, Lily turned to Ethan. "You're really doing it," she said softly. "You're showing up." Ethan met her gaze, his expression serious but warm. "I told you I would. And I meant it." She nodded, a flicker of something like trust passing between them. It wasn't a grand declaration or a dramatic moment, but it was enough, a quiet acknowledgement that things were changing. As the sun began to set, the three of them sat on a bench overlooking a pond, Jamie dozing against Ethan's side. Lily glanced at Ethan, her eyes thoughtful. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The company, the life you had before?" Ethan looked down at Jamie, his heart full. "Not for a second," he said. "This is where I'm supposed to be." Lily smiled, and for the first time in years, it felt genuine, unguarded. Ethan didn't know what the future held for them as a family or if their relationship could ever be what it once was. But for now, he was content to take it one day at a time, building something new from the pieces of the past. As they sat together, the last rays of sunlight casting a golden glow over the water, Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He didn't need to plan every step of the journey ahead. For now, it was enough to be here, with Jamie and Lily, ready to face whatever came next. As the sun set on their new beginning, Ethan, Lily, and Jamie found themselves embracing the imperfect yet beautiful journey of family. It wasn't about erasing the past but building a future filled with trust, love, and hope.
This story reminds us that life's greatest lessons often come from unexpected moments. Ethan's journey teaches us the power of accountability, second chances, and putting love above ambition. It's never too late to make things right and choose what truly matters. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more unforgettable tales from the True Crime Studio. Thank you for watching, and may your days be filled with love, growth, and endless possibilities. See you in the next story.